Hey, what for the school? C'est la quand les fautes, right?
What?
Like really big murders shit.
Oh, jag ska ta fram för mig och hemma. Jag kunde ha varit
I should be for my list.
That's what they were.
I thought you said, but should have aroused me.
She was response.
I think we need this. Yeah. No, we were like, talking about the year, so she's really, it's a neat, like, sometimes she'd write more in the exam. That I, yeah, like for some questions, where she gets, like, it was,
We have looked at it.
yeah, but like, it was even from the syllabus, so the big songs. I was the two, we passed it that.
What other shit did?
Yeah, I can,
You
this.
She did not. She's like, well, I must say you can't like worry or something. But she had to do it to do math. Well, she had to do like science,
Oh.
and she didn't want to do environment. And she didn't want to make pure.
Is that our rent space? That's not home.
Well, I don't know. Huh? You say it was all because of.
Yeah.
I mean, if I take the one, right, she doesn't merit any one. So I just.
Yes. They just put up a bunch of people, right? If I know this thing.
I'll tell it to, well, send her everything she reads. If you like to read school.
Yeah.
I was just gonna.
I was so much trouble and I literally. I was birds actually. My mom was very smart, so I felt that's just that run and not so stuff. Anybody might.
But the options was E, right?
No.
Was D.
D.
How many months was?
That's okay.
Now.
Maths.
Oh,
It's crazy. Well, we don't like maths, it's criminal. I just wish I could have doing maths, so I said so.
But you could have.
But they're telling me myself, I don't know.
That's
I actually started out like, I was definitely like, I was be a group account, and that's why we didn't want to start, because of like, crack subjects, I kind of fall above it.
what unit one was 20 months, so.
But yeah, I just wasn't be tough.
Unit two, I don't think that much. Me too. When it have months and more, I like it. But it's here, part of it. We had stuff with the blood vessels, right? We had stuff with blood vessels.
Yeah.
Okay. Yeah, but I still have hope, I sure you never expected to see you this. Oh, and look at it. Right, so when you all get a chance, just practice drawing it, so you all can you all can remember it, right? So you might be drawing twice, the second time you do it, for sure gotta remember it. Why?
Because I don't want to.
You could not watch it and just give it to me so I can see where you're.
I'm going to time.
Okay.
Rather she might.
Right, so today we will. I was still in sleep today, shall we do your person? Also known as the red blood cells. Okay, so we know how blood is transported. We know how blood is transported around the body, right? We know the progress as it enters the heart, goes to the lungs, comes back to the heart, then sent to the rest of the body. What we have to know about the structure of red blood cells, no? Right? We have to know the structure and the function. Right? So what's the main function of red blood cells or erythrocytes? Oxygen and carbon dioxide, right? So it transports both. So yes, it carries the oxygen for respiration, but one of the byproducts is carbon dioxide. That carbon dioxide must also be removed. Right? One of the main ways it's removed is through red blood cells. Okay, so let's start with the structure. With the shot. We. I'm trying to figure out what's you know Michelle. Oh, vacation. Right here, it's me talking to the 14-year-old boy. Oh yeah, for the vacation, right? For the vacation. Right? For the vacation classes. Before one of my classes started, I come here, I see Aglash, a real small kid with his boy. And afterwards, I see him going to a form 3 lesson. So I was like, Aglash, you know how old that boy is? And then he has his voice part, right? When I say he's 14, Aglash was like, that's okay, sir. From that day on, I try to see, he can't be supporting that.
Wait, what am I saying? What
Trying hard.
But it's not fine.
If it's 17 out, that is fine. If it's 18, well, no.
The boy was 14.
That's good. 14? Wait, that's not 14 or
14. Wait, but I tell you the truth.
What happened?
I was like, I was super fine. My work was flat. One watch my work, I was like, you like work everything. But I'm like,
It's really good.
Okay, so this is the general structure for red blood cell, right? So this is like it from the side, and if you look at it, it's from the inside. This is how it, right? And you know, with here, it is like a biconcave shape. That simply means that like a sink. Right? In this shape, I have a sink in the middle. Right? So it was like a circle, and you press it in the middle. That's what we mean by a biconcave shape. Right? That will sink in the middle. Right? So that's what I represent. Right, so this side.
it was a picture.
Yeah, a lower shape, right?
I mean, the thing I'm commented on TikTok.
Hey, you can do that. And you don't think everybody knows you're an important you
That was not bad going on there.
Right. Okay, so this is the biconcave shape. Right? All red blood cells have a biconcave shape. And we should know that structure, it doesn't just have a certain structure for no reason. It always has a rule. So what are the pigments you find in red blood cells? Hemoglobin, right? And what color is hemoglobin? Give me some. A red color. Right?
So but isn't red body, but it's opposite, oxygenated.
It's red true. Without different shades, but it's red true. And as a mix. Don't listen to TikTok so much. So hemoglobin is a red pigment found in blood cells. Right? From unit one, we should have also known that hemoglobin is a type of protein.
Yes.
Right? What type of protein? Globular? No sure?
No.
Yes, hemoglobin is a globular protein. Right? Okay. So what is the significance of this hemoglobin in the red blood cell? What is its main function?
Set oxygen.
Accept oxygen, right? And what about the hemoglobin structure allows it to do so? So it's something. So this is a type of protein, right? Remember, some proteins have two different sets. That a protein, part was protein and part was non-protein. Hemoglobin has a non-protein part.
Okay.
What is the non-protein part made up of? There are four of it. Heme group, right? So they have iron in it, right? So they are iron molecules, part of the heme group and hemoglobin. Those iron molecules are what allow hemoglobin to bind to oxygen, right? And they bind because of the molecule, right? Iron will be positive, oxygen will carry negative charge, right? Okay. So again, hemoglobin allows for the transport of oxygen. Hemoglobin itself has iron groups that allows this.
Thank you. Let's go back to the jump around.
No, I'll give all the way by just talking for them. Right? Right. So each hemoglobin molecule, each individual hemoglobin molecule, red blood cells will have a few, right? But each individual hemoglobin molecule, how much binding sites does that? How much subunits? 4, right? So each individual hemoglobin could hold up to 4 oxygen molecules. Right, and how will give you only red blood cells, right, not just 1. Right, so hemoglobin carry 4 oxygens. Proteins. Four oxygens. Right, and hemoglobin in its normal state is full hemoglobin, right? When oxygen is bound to hemoglobin, for that oxy hemoglobin. Right, oxy for oxygen, hemoglobin for hemoglobin. Right, oxygen, so when oxygen is bound to it, they call it oxyhemoglobin. Right, when carbon dioxide is bonded to it, we call that carbino hemoglobin. Right, so if you all have this student, that's what you say. They say carbon hemoglobin. It's hemoglobin that is attached to carbon dioxide.
So it's hemoglobin and deoxyhemoglobin.
Well, deoxyhemoglobin could just be oxygen absent, but that don't necessarily be carbon dioxide. It could be, but it don't necessarily be. So once you're attached, right? So besides these two gases, right, it's have another gas that people tend to inhale. They should be that also attaches to hemoglobin. Carbon monoxide, right? So carbon monoxide, right? So when carbon monoxide is attached, the hemoglobin have another name. This one is just carbon. It's carb oxyhemoglobin. Right? Oxyhemoglobin. So these are and it's very rare you'll bring these two. Like ask it to define this on what it is, but if this topic comes, you're gonna get something else in, and you're gonna have to reference it at some point. Okay, but you should know all three just in case. So carboxyhemoglobin for carbon monoxide, amino hemoglobin, carbon dioxide. Now, why is it such a dangerous thing? So it has something called carbon monoxide poisoning. Why is carbon monoxide such a dangerous gas? Say,
Because it doesn't have a scent.
it doesn't have a scent. So yes, that's true. So you don't know any need, right? But why?
It doesn't have very.
I was gonna say nine, so it's gonna be hemoglobin.
Right. So carbon monoxide has the greatest affinity. Sorry, hemoglobin has a greater affinity for carbon monoxide and oxygen. When I talk about affinity, it means the hemoglobin had a choice, they'll take up carbon monoxide rather than oxygen. Now, why does this become a problem? Your body doesn't use carbon monoxide, it uses oxygen. But if these binding sites are occupied by carbon monoxide instead of oxygen, we're gonna have
Tissue.
and what process would that affect? Aerobic respiration, right? So your body does not produce enough energy and eventually die, right? Because you need energy to keep the heart beats, you need energy to breathe, right? Okay. So take out this for now. And then it's eating thread. Yeah. Okay, top drawer, right? You always hemoglobin inside it. What view is that? So you know we have cross section, transverse section, longitudinal section. Is that? Sure. So this will be transverse. Right? So this from the side, from that to be transverse. Right? So if you want to put a type of the diagram, it would be a transverse section of a red blood cell. Now, later on, I think this is not true, or whenever we do immunology, we're gonna have to refer to red blood cells again, but we also have to go through all white blood cells, which will include the lymphocytes, phagocytes, macrophages, things like that, right? I mean, can do it in this topic, but it don't make sense, right? Because we are doing it again. Okay, right, so you had in lymph nodes, same as right, erythrocytes or red blood cells. And structurally, right, just of the red blood cell itself, what is the most important structural feature for red blood cell? The biconcave shape. Sure. Well, no animal cells without a cell, yes? Right, so what else? So this cell lacks something that other cells, almost every other cell have. Lacks a structure. No nucleus, right? And why is that such a good thing for a red blood cell? Again, link its function to its structure. So why does it lack of a nucleus? Why is it so essential for a red blood cell?
There's more space for oxygen to be contained in each red blood cell.
Right? So a lack of nucleus frees up some space for more oxygen to be transported. Right? So if a question comes and it asks you, what is one structural feature of a red blood cell that helps with its function, that's a possible answer, right? You state a lack of nucleus, which helps with more oxygen uptake. Another one could be the biconcave shape. So we're writing for the red blood cells. Erythrocytes are small. Erythrocytes are small. Small cells without a nucleus. Small cells without a nucleus, full stop. Their red color is due to the globular protein hemoglobin. Their red color is due to the globular protein hemoglobin. And their main function is to transport oxygen and carbon dioxide, between the lungs, and respiring, tissue. Full stop. Okay, so skip on a line. The characteristics of erythrocytes. Okay, so there's some point four. So the first point, number one. Erythrocytes are small. Which allow hemoglobin molecules. Erythrocytes are small, which allow hemoglobin molecules to be located, near the cell membrane, which allows for quick gas exchange. Full stop. Number two. Erythrocytes have a biconcave shape. Which increases the surface area. To volume ratio, which increases the surface area to volume ratio. Making diffusion more rapid. making diffusion more rapid, full stop. And the third one, there are no nucleus. There are no nucleus comma mitochondria. There are no nucleus comma mitochondria or endoplasmic reticulum or ER and no endoplasmic reticulum. Which allows more hemoglobin to be stored. Which allows more hemoglobin to be stored. Full stop. Right, so those are just 3. Okay, just confirming this, right? We did transport in plants. We went through xylem, phloem, transpiration, translocation. We did all that, right? And you remember it, right? Okay, we all remember doing it.
Yeah.
Until the end of Tim's coming up. The end of Tim's coming up.
Yeah, it's good.
And then two.
Yeah.
What?
But in Marx's
We have one next two, not just the.
oh. Okay, alright, so we have a graph associated with this, right? Now, for those of you all who like maths, so like this. So my kind of graphs. I didn't come up with these graphs. Make it simple.
Not true. Because making numbers are important in my
Oh. Like that one was it? This one. Oh, before we go on to the graph, something else. Right? Hemoglobin has something called the allosteric effect. Right? They display something called the allosteric effect. Right? So your chemistry students, wait to explain to me what this means. Right? Right? So anybody who right? What do you think the allosteric effect is? Not just with hemoglobin, just in general.
Say somebody who would have an exchange period knowledge.
Right? Oh, okay, what is an allotrope? That was in C-second. C-second. An allotrope. Arranged differently, right? Okay. So we think allosteric effect is.
It's fine, something else is something practical change.
Yeah, that's what it is, right? We take the only for it. Me follow. Tell her to go up and see. Oh yeah, it was in unit 1 as well. That's true. Alright, so yeah, those who did unit 1 5 already should be familiar with this. Okay? So let's say this is the structure of hemoglobin, right? Like if you're not talking hemoglobin, let's say this is the simplicity. Right, in 4 boxes, The 4 boxes represent a site for each oxygen to bind to. Right? Now, this is just hemoglobin without any oxygen molecule. Right? No oxygen is present in it. At some point, it's going to contain an oxygen. Right? At some point, an oxygen needs to be taken out. That initial oxygen is going to be very difficult for the hemoglobin to obtain, meaning it's going to take a lot of effort. Right? However, after that first oxygen is bound to it, the consecutive oxygen is going to be much easier. It's difficult to obtain. Second one. Right, second oxygen, less difficult. Right, and why is it less difficult? When this oxygen binds to the hemoglobin, it causes a change in shape. Right? So if this hemoglobin, the shape changes in a way where the second oxygen that needs to bind will be easier. After this second oxygen binds to hemoglobin, it changes shape once again, making it even easier for the third oxygen to become. Right? And the same thing happens to the fourth oxygen. So we talk about the allosteric effect, which simply means a change in shape or change in conformation that allows oxygen to be taken up easier. So the hardest oxygen to take up is the first one. Right? The easy way to take up it, the most difficult part of doing a task is actually starting it. That's where you can apply things. Right? But once it starts, it gets progressively easier. Right? So everybody understands the allosteric. Right? So that case, you have to know that to understand this graph. Oh.
This is getting stuck.
Well, I didn't just want it as a task. Maybe partial by invalid. So
Think about the dollar.
every time, I have to go that dollar each. Or every time I put to the table, I'll give me $1 each. Because as you want to go into the pay. Okay, so everybody here knows oxygen is a gas, right? So everybody knows that, right? Radiation and gases exert pressure, right? So gases in a contained area exerts pressure. Okay? Right. So what you can do is you can measure the partial pressure of oxygen. Right? So the partial pressure of oxygen is correlated to the volume. The higher the partial pressure of oxygen, the more volume of oxygen present. Right? Now you can actually go and measure the amount of volume of oxygen in somebody's body. It's very difficult. There's no other way you can do it. So instead, it is partial pressure as a way of measuring. So you can think of it as partial pressure being the volume.
That affected by the output and the stroke. Like.
Yeah, it could be,
Alright.
but it will more be affected by, lung capacity and like the activity. Yeah, right? So just think of it as bone, even though it's not really bone, it is representing bone. Because bone is not pleasant. Okay, so you have partial pressure on the x-axis and hemoglobin saturation on your y-axis. They're trying to understand what's going on. Remember, you're thinking of this as volume. It's not volume, that's what you're thinking of it. Right? And hemoglobin saturation, for something to be saturated, it means fatigue. Right? This is in percentage. Imagine this in percentage. Right? So they're trying to figure out the trend before we figure out what's going on. What is the trend of this graph?
Well,
Yeah, but there is a path, right? So from here, which is zero, the equation. So let's say the partial pressure of 2 kilopascals. How is the rate? The rate of increase,
it's still, well,
right? It's a slow, a steady increase.
Yeah.
Okay. After that steady increase, something happens after 2 kilopascals, right? What happens? Right, so the drastic or rapid increase. Okay, no, we have a reason for that. Anybody get something reason?
so that's evident that we understand the fact when we first oxygen, it was a little difficult to find the hemoglobin. So that's why we see graph like it took a little while.
It does,
Yeah.
it does, the
Actually,
reaction,
yeah,
it does
this is at the speed and well as it increases. I think well in taking the oxygen we'll see how steady slow becomes because you just accept it.
right, because the hemoglobin change shape, oxygen is easier to accept. Right, so yeah, this is evidence and the other study. Okay, because, and this is very important in this graph, because that's what in this is. I can't figure out the good, like what we're on this graph. So the general trend is that as volume of oxygen or partial pressure of oxygen increases, the hemoglobin saturation increases. Okay, now why is this important? And what did it say? This is stated that this is stating that whenever there's a higher concentration or volume of oxygen, hemoglobin is going to be more saturated, and then your heads are going to be, well, obviously, right? But this is actually very important because it's not the case. It's not always the case, right? So why is this important? Right? When your red blood cells transporting oxygen, it transports it from the heart, right, to the rest of the body. Now, where is the blood oxygenated in the heart? Where is it oxygenated? The lungs, right? So in the lungs, is there a high concentration of oxygen or carbon dioxide? Oxygen. Well, technically both here, but at the point where the blood enters the lungs and it goes back to the heart, it will be high in oxygen. Right? So if the lungs is high in oxygen, right? what happens with the red blood cells? So it easily take up the oxygen or will it be difficult? Easy, because of distribution. It will have a lot of oxygen present, so it'll be easy to take up that oxygen. That's a good thing. So diffusion will be quick or will be slow? Quick, it'll be quick. Now, if this wasn't the case, that would not happen. Right? Okay, and now it's going to the, let's say it's going to respiratory cells. As it's going to respiratory cells, what's going to happen with the oxygen concentration of the hemoglobin? It'll decrease, right? So it'll keep on increasing until it runs out. Okay, and that's a good thing, because the same way if you lower oxygen concentration, what's going to happen with oxygen? They're going to be harder to take up, right? And that's what you want. Let's say you exercise, right? And your red blood cells doing all this with the transport oxygen throughout the body. It reaches an area where there's barely any oxygen. It have oxygen, just not a lot. You want that red blood cell to take up oxygen from the other side. Yeah, so your red blood cell going towards I said muscle. In the muscle, if you exercise it wouldn't have a lot of oxygen present. But just not a lot. Would you want your red blood cell to take up that oxygen? No. That is what this prevents it. Right? In areas of low oxygen concentration, oxygen will not be taken up. Understand? This ensures that only when there's a large amount of oxygen will the red blood cell take up the oxygen. When there's low amounts of oxygen, the red blood cell will just leave it. Good? Because that indicates of if the other cell needs it or not. Right? Right. So just take a note for that.
That only to being able to pick up the carbon monoxide.
Yeah. Well, more carbon, or both, with carbon dioxide and carbon monoxide. Carbon monoxide, just in general, is a better fit for hemoglobin. So that's why it can be taken out. With hemoglobin, yeah.
Yeah. I have
Okay, so you'll not have to take on the graph yet, right? They just try to understand. You'll have it already. Okay, well, just under the graph, we're gonna write the hemoglobin dissociation curve. That's the heading. Hemoglobin dissociation curve. And the hemoglobin dissociation curve. So right, and this is a graph. This is the graph of hemoglobin saturation. This is a graph of hemoglobin saturation on the y-axis. On the y-axis. And the partial pressures. And the partial pressures of oxygen and the partial pressures of oxygen on the x-axis. Good stuff. The more oxygen present, the more oxygen. in hemoglobin, the more oxygen present in hemoglobin, comma, the higher the saturation. The higher the saturation. Full stop. The general trend of the graph. The general trend of the graph. The general trend of the graph shows that the greater the partial pressure of oxygen shows that the greater the partial pressure of oxygen, comma, the greater the hemoglobin saturation, the greater the hemoglobin saturation. The greater the hemoglobin saturation. Full stop. This means that red blood cells, this means that red blood cells means that areas, sorry, this means that red blood cells, huh? Oh, they distract me. No, I wasn't sleeping away. I was just only making me pronounce more, like take time to pronounce more words. So it distracted me from what I say. Yeah. Right? Why are they? Whatever. This means that red blood cells in an area means that red blood cells in an area with high oxygen. This means that red blood cells in an area with high oxygen. It's because in areas with high oxygen. I'm making sure. Will take up oxygen. Will take up oxygen more readily. Will take up oxygen more readily than in areas Fine, Sweat. Fine. Than in areas with low oxygen concentration. Okay. So up here, right? The oxygen concentration, I just say at this point in the graph, is the high oxygen concentration. Sorry, so high oxygen concentration, and so the partial pressure there is it high? Sorry, saturation is it high or low? Right, so high oxygen, high saturation. So what is an example of an irregular body that we could find this Lungs, right? So the capillary, sorry, the alveoli, the lungs, right? So down here now, we have a low partial pressure of oxygen. Right, so low oxygen. And we have a low saturation. Was it your refinement? Right, so active muscles, right, or respiring cells. So muscles. Or respiring cells. Remember, if the cell is respiring, if you want to take its oxygen, right? You actually give up the oxygen. So that's it.
You don't sound right.
Yes. Okay. But probably goes on and kind of. Alright, so if you go off the ground, just think about no. Also.
So. President, vice president, second treasurer.
All these traits, one things that goes up on promises.
So sure, that goes on I was fair to see.
Yeah.
Ariana just saying your friend Abhilasha telling me not, or trying to convince me not to send you pictures of the boat. So she said, you don't have to see, or you don't have to see properly.
No.
Right, so just quickly taking on the graph. Move on to the next part. Right, so after you have done everything, you just skip in a line, and we're gonna just take a note for the allosteric effect, right? Okay, so it just writes in for the allosteric effect. Hemoglobin displays displays. That's what you say I was going to fight up.
No, I just needed confirmations.
Hemoglobin displays
Please, right?
displays the allosteric effect. Hemoglobin displays the allosteric effect. Oh, you can't spell? For all they needed for the interpretation, right? The allosteric effect, which means that with each successive binding, which means with each successive binding of oxygen, comma, there is a change. There is a change in the hemoglobin structure. There is a change in the hemoglobin structure allowing for easier oxygen uptake, allowing for easier oxygen uptake. Full stop. Right, so I just use an arbitrary numbers again, so you will understand. If it takes 10 seconds for the first oxygen molecule to bind to hemoglobin, how much time would it take for the second oxygen molecule to bind? So less than 10 seconds, right? And then the third one would take probably less than 2 seconds. And the last one might take less than a second, right? So that is the allosteric effect. Okay, so something can happen here, right? In this same graph, we can have a shift. So just going to make this pass out. Okay, so this could possibly happen, right? So the blue dotted line, what is the difference between the blue dotted line and the black line? Okay, can you see this one? Right, so what's the difference?
One is low carbon percent oils.
Correct. Right? And so which one is low carbon?
One at a time.
Yeah. Right? So, or we can put normal carbon dioxide. So normal CO2 levels. This one is for high CO2 levels. So this is the importance of it, right? When you have high carbon dioxide levels, okay, what does that most likely indicate? If your bloodstream has high carbon dioxide level, what does that indicate?
There's a deeper oxygen uptake.
That's correct, but I mean,
What is it?
not disease, like what it means you're doing to have a high carbon exercise, right? So you're telling your body you're exercising, that's why you're producing high amounts of carbon dioxide. But if you're exercising, if you're doing any type of activity, what would your cells need? Oxygen. So during times of stress or exercise, the carbon dioxide levels increases. When the carbon dioxide levels increases, the affinity for oxygen drops. Now, why is that a good thing? Why is it important? If the affinity for oxygen drops, right? We're gonna put the oxygens on the hemoglobin. Well, we're gonna put the oxygens in your red blood cells.
We use this environment to show.
So they'll be released, right? They wouldn't hold on to this. Okay? high carbon dioxide levels will tell the red blood cells, okay, we need to let go of these oxygens. Right? So the oxygens will now no longer be held by red blood cells, it will be distributed into muscle cells, right? Or muscle tissue. And that muscle tissue can then respond. So when you have high carbon dioxide levels, right? Hemoglobin saturation drops. Right? This is with normal carbon dioxide levels. With increased carbon dioxide levels, the hemoglobin saturation drops, regardless of the partial pressure of oxygen. Right? What if we have really low levels of carbon dioxide? It will increase. Right? So this is for the motion. When there are high carbon dioxide levels, it shifts to the right. Right? When it has lower than normal carbon dioxide levels, it shifts to the left all the time. So for the low, it will look like this. Right? And this will represent low CO2 levels. So this is the motion. It can be either side, but most of the time it's going to be to the right. Right, or to the bottom. Right, so we established that during exercise, you'd have high carbon dioxide levels. So oxygen will readily be given up by the red blood cells. It will hold on to it. When will we have the situation with the blue dotted lines? Like when you have really low carbon dioxide levels. Well, in your lung capillaries, right? So how you're thinking of it is like, okay, well, if I have low carbon dioxide, that means I want to take up the oxygen, right? So I can transport it around the body. You want your red blood cells to be able to take up that oxygen. Where does it have low carbon dioxide levels? In your lungs, right? So in your lungs, we have really low carbon dioxide levels. The oxygen is readily taken up by red blood cells. That's why they can take up the oxygen there, right? That I know because of diffusion. Right, so we take another look. So there's a separate graph, right? You're not drawing the back on the same graph. Right, a separate graph for this one. Right, I will take the notes for the power shift underneath it. Right, and some way the notes includes. Right, so there's the hemoglobin affinity for the different gases. Carbon monoxide will be taken out most readily. If you don't have carbon monoxide available, oxygen will be taken up. If oxygen is not available, then we're going to take up the carbon dioxide. That's the order. Right, so under that, we just write in a note for the Bohr shift or the Bohr effect, right? When carbon dioxide, when carbon dioxide with carbon dioxide concentrations, when carbon dioxide concentrations are high, when carbon dioxide concentrations are high, the erythrocytes, the erythrocytes, pronounce erythrocytes. No, you just pronounce it because I pronounce properly.
Well, I think there's a contribution to for the couple, but
Yes, everything I. What's it? What was the last thing I said?
when the concentrations are high, the erythrocytes.
Right, the erythrocyte, the erythrocytes cause the hemoglobin, cause the hemoglobin to release some oxygen. Cause the hemoglobin to release some oxygen. And stop. High concentrations of CO2 in respiring cells and tissue. High concentrations of CO2 in respiring cells and tissue need oxygen, which is obtained from hemoglobin, more readily than usual. Usual. I'm trying to pronounce the usual than usual.
That
Stop.
would be usually.
No, you can't end the sentence in that.
Or just like an English rather than.
Yo, should have said English.
When you watch in the old decision, I'll say, BA or before you.
It'll be before the. Because it's you.
I think you.
She seems like the type to do that, right? Young. She's young. Alright, okay. High carbon dioxide concentration. Lowers the affinity. High carbon dioxide concentration lowers the affinity for oxygen. Lowers the affinity for oxygen by hemoglobin. Lowers the affinity of oxygen by hemoglobin. Full stop. This is called the Bohr effect. This is called the Bohr effect. Right, so again, the Bohr effect, the graph shifts to the right. Okay, as hemoglobin, the affinity for oxygen in hemoglobin lowers. Right? Like you want that to happen, so more oxygen can be released to the respiring muscle tissue. Okay, last thing we have to do for this. How do fetuses breathe? Right, so through the umbilical cord. And how does it get the oxygen? Through the umbilical cord as well, right? Where does the umbilical cord get the oxygen? The placenta. Now, if you're thinking about it, would the parent or the mom and the fetus have to share the oxygen? So how does the oxygen in the placenta actually reach the fetus? Because if you think about it, right, the oxygen that is passing through the placenta, right, it's shared by both mother and parent. So how does it actually reach across to the fetus? Why does it go to the fetus? Why doesn't it just stay in the why doesn't it stay in the mother's bloodstream, the placenta? Yes, no. So the fetus need oxygen. The oxygen comes from the placenta. But what you all think, or why you all think, would the baby, or sorry, not the baby, the fetus get the oxygen from the mother? Why? Like, what allows that to happen? Right? The reason is simple, right? Fetal hemoglobin has a higher affinity for oxygen than adult hemoglobin. So it means the oxygen in the bloodstream would be quicker taken up by fetal hemoglobin compared to the mother. Right? It wouldn't take up all, because obviously moms will have to breathe and respire, but it'll take it up. Okay? So you have to remember that. So if you were to just draw a graph, right? So this is the oxygen association for the mom. Right? For adult hemoglobin. Right? This is how it goes for the adult hemoglobin. How would it look for the fetal hemoglobin? Would it shift to the right or would it shift to the left? If you want to take up, if you want the red blood cells to take up more oxygen, we shift to the left. If you want the red blood cells to take up more hemoglobin, we'd have to shift to the left. If you want the red blood cells to release oxygen, it will shift to the left, to the bottom. Right? So this will be fetal hemoglobin. Right? So that's a high affinity for oxygen. Okay, we're not finished yet. We still have time. We have a good bit of time. We have about 15 minutes. I want to run through some classical questions on this topic. MCQ. Right. I'll give all the multiple choices when you answer the structured questions. Oh, yeah, you wanted to skip class and where are you going again? Friday, where are you going? Well, someone is going somewhere. Right, I want to skip class and go Antigua.
Yeah, but your class on Friday.
No, I mean you want to skip that class. You just tell me to feel sorry for you because you have that class.
No, I'm not stopping after this class.
Right, but you're skipping physics and you're missing a physics class because you're gonna.
Let's have a look at it up. I passed some more to pure physics more.
Right, you want to go line with Sanjeev and Antigua. Let Sanjeev come physics class with you too. You'll be what? Why would I want to go on TV? Huh? Mhm. Make sure Carol books them.
What's right with it?
I didn't have this. But what?
It's correct.
So right up.
It's full right.
Yes, I think I would rather the contract is wise for youth,
Yeah.
leaders,
Oh.
right? And 2 out of the
We don't get that.
Yeah.
right? So it don't make sense how to go. So I should stay. Okay, they just see how the questions on these would come, right? You all could see this,
Yes.
like the words and stuff. No, it means I just send you all the 10 of them. You have to click on the 24. True, I could just send it regardless. Huh? Yes. But this was for last year. I just send it to you all, in case you can see it on the TV. Well, you surely can see it on TV, WhatsApp taking on too far. I think it's it.
I was just trying. See what the end of the entrance, you was looking right the outside.
It's on my laptop. And now, I don't mean WhatsApp taking on too far. So. Anyway, everybody can see. Right, so figure 5 shows the oxygen dissociation curve for adult hemoglobin at low carbon dioxide concentrations in the lung capillaries of a mammal. So there is low carbon dioxide concentrations. What are you really saying? Normal and high oxygen levels, right? Right? In the lung capillaries of a mammal, even if you couldn't figure it out from that, once it's in lung capillaries, so it's figure out high oxygen concentration or partial pressure. The shape of the curve in figure 5 is described as the S or sigmoidal shape. Right? So again, saturation on your Y and partial pressure on your X. First question. Explain how the loading of hemoglobin with oxygen gives rise to the S-shaped curve in figure 5. Who want to answer this one? And what are you really asking? Yeah, explain how the loading of hemoglobin. What are you really asking? To explain the shape and why it has the shape, right? Now, what is the allosteric effect? They basically ask you to explain the allosteric effect without actually asking you. This is how questions come most of the time, right? They're not going to say what they're asking for. You'll have to figure it out. So how will we begin to answer this? Where you're starting from? Right, so we can start from there, right? Hemoglobin has 4 sites for oxygen to be bound to. Let me just put in the first oxygen. Right, so we'll say the first oxygen was most difficult to load. Now, at the same time, you have to relate it back to the shape of the graph. So you go into your x-axis and you're checking around which partial pressure they're looking at. 1, right? So you relate it back to your graph and you'll say this is seen at a partial, I just write in PP, partial pressure of 1 kilopascals, where the graph has sudden increase in gradient. Right, so you state that, and then you just state that successive oxygen binds easier to hemoglobin due to its allosteric effect. Right? 3 easy marks. The hard part is not stating what the allosteric effect is, right? Because we just did this 5 minutes ago. The hard part is figuring out what they're asking. Because some students, what they would have done, is just describe the shape of the graph without even mentioning that it's harder to load the first one compared to the other oxygen molecules. Right, that's the tricky parts about the exam, knowing what answer or what the question is asking. Right, part 2. The steepest part of the curve in figure 5 is between partial pressures 2.5 and 5 kilopascals. A small decrease in the partial pressure of oxygen results in a steep drop in the saturation of hemoglobin. Explain the importance of the curve between partial pressures 2.5 and 5 kilopascals in mammals. So they ask me to read the graph backwards, right? Instead of reading it up, so from 2.5 to 5, instead of reading it up to down, they want you to read it from 5 to 2.5. They want you to read it from top to bottom. So why is this drop in partial pressure necessary in mammals? What does that accomplish? When you drop the partial pressure of oxygen, what do you drop? So from the graph, as the partial pressure decreases, what happens to the saturation of hemoglobin? It decreases. Why is that a necessary thing? Right. So just said, it allows for the easier drop or release of oxygen to molecules in low concentration areas, like respiring cells. That drop in the partial pressure of oxygen allows hemoglobin to release more oxygen. Right? That oxygen could then be used by the respiring cells, right? Instead of being hoarded by the red blood cells. Right? So the drop in partial pressure of oxygen allows red blood cells to readily release oxygen molecules for respiring tissue to use. Right? As just 3 marks, there's a short version of the answer. You'll just make it a little bit more sparkly. Right? But that's the general consensus of it. You want to drop the partial pressure so that oxygen in the red blood cells would go to the tissue. See, that's always the I don't believe it. Okay, so that's for part 2, right? I just put the part 2 in case I were taking a picture, so you all know which is which. This is part 4. And I just try one more part. I tell you, I know you come a little late, but you understand what we're doing, right? You could get notes from. No. You get it from all. Okay. Right, okay. So this last part here, figure 6, shows the oxygen dissociation curve for adult hemoglobin and low carbon dioxide and blah, 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 blah. Right? And various partial pressures in an active muscles where the concentration of carbon dioxide is high. The loading of oxygen onto hemoglobin takes place where oxygen concentrations are high. The unloading of oxygen takes place where carbon dioxide is produced and oxygen concentrations are low. So they're telling you the trends here. Right? Okay. So the solid line represents percentage saturation in lung capillaries at pH 7.4. Next one is at pH 7.2.
Okay, now if you're just comparing it, before you even get into the question, which one has a higher affinity for oxygen? A pH of 7.4 or 7.2? The solid one is 7.4, the dotted one is 7.2. The 7.4, right? So that's what we should notice off the bat. Right? So label on the curve in figure 6 where you expect the loading of oxygen to occur in lung capillaries and the unloading of oxygen to occur in an active muscle. So which part you expect which part in the graph you expect oxygen to be loaded onto the red blood cell, onto loaded of oxygen to occur in lung capillaries. Yeah. Which part you expect oxygen to be loaded into hemoglobin? So just give me a number on the partial pressures. 1, sure. So we loading oxygen onto the hemoglobin. When does that happen? So the loading of oxygen takes place when oxygen partial pressures are high, right? And the unloading will take place whenever it's low, right? So we have loading here or around this area, and we have unloading of oxygen as the partial pressures drop. Okay. Next part, state the name of the effect of increasing carbon dioxide's concentration on the oxygen dissociation curve. What is the name of the effect that causes this the Bohr effect, right? So that's what it's showing here, right? This is the Bohr effect. And what is the giveaway is carbon dioxide. What would that do to the blood, the pH? Increase or decrease it? So carbon dioxide will make it more acidic, so the pH would decrease. So the dotted line representing high carbon dioxide concentration. Right, last part we'll do. State one significance of increasing the effect of carbon dioxide concentrations on the efficient delivery of oxygen to an active muscle. It's just one line. So if you increase the concentration of carbon dioxide, what does that do to oxygen delivery? Does it increase oxygen delivery to cells or does it decrease it? Sure. If you increase carbon dioxide, what would that do to the oxygen in the red blood cell? It will cause it to decrease the red blood cells' oxygen. Where would the oxygen go? To the respiring cells. So it would cause a decrease in oxygen in red blood cells, but an increase in oxygen in respiring cells. Okay? More oxygen is. So because it's one mark, you just had to state what happened. Respiring. For respiring, they're correct one. Respiring. Right? So yes, more oxygen will be available to respiring cells as they are released from red blood cells. Right? That's significant. Right. Anybody have any questions from today? Right? So that would be it for transporting mammals. The next topic we're going to do next week, for those who want to do some reading up beforehand, would be homeostasis. Right? Right. Anybody have any questions from today? Anybody online have any questions from today? Okay, right. So if no questions, that's it for today's class. Right, I'll see you all next week. We'll start homeostasis and hormonal action. So that's what why I like
Yeah, that's friend from his car. No, this board, not board. That's fun. This is real fun.
Actually, I'm watching like you, Margaret.
Oh, yeah. Watch that. You could go.